Masechet Baba Mesia Daf Kof Het. We were just talking about a law that if someone owns land next to a riverbank, then he has to cut down his trees next to the river so that people can pull with ropes on boats, and they have to walk along the riverbank. And so, since we're talking about the responsibility that people have towards the public good, so we have a couple of more halachot in that regard. Amar Rav Yehuda, Hakol li'igle gapav afilu miyatmeh v'rabanan la'amay ta'amad rabanan la'sirichi netiruta. Rav Yehuda says everybody has to participate in the construction of a city wall, meaning they have to pay, the city wall needs to be fixed, everybody has to pay $100, and you even take from the money of orphans, because they live in the city too, and they benefit from the wall. However, Torah sages do not have to participate. Why? Because the sages do not require protection. The merit of their Torah study protects them. But if they're if they're collecting money to dig a river or a well for drinking water, then Torah scholars, they need to drink water too. It's not their Torah knowledge is not going to quench their literal thirst, and so they need to participate. But this law that the rabbis have to participate in digging a well is only if everybody's chipping in money and they're going to hire people to go and dig it. But that's that they don't go out in a crowd. But if everybody goes out in a crowd, in other words, instead of participating by paying money, everybody's going out and doing physical labor, then the Torah scholars do not have to go out and do physical labor with everybody else, because it's not respectful to them for them to have to do physical labor in front of everyone. Amar Rav Yehuda lecharia de nahara tata'e misaya'e ila'e la misaya'e tata'e bechilufa b'maya de mitra. Rav Yehuda has another law that if people are dredging up a river, the river is not flowing well because things get all stuck in the river, and they have to clean it out. So the people that are lower down the river, downstream, have to help the people upstream, because that benefits them also. If the river is not going to flow well upstream, then the water is not going to get downstream. So they have to go upstream and help out. However, the people that live upstream do not have to help the people that live downstream, because that does not benefit them. Once the water comes to them, and then it leaves, and it goes further downstream, the people that live up there, they don't care whether it flows downstream or not. It doesn't give any benefit to them. Therefore, they don't have to help. In fact, not only does it not give benefit, it's actually a detriment for them. Because if the water is dammed up downstream, then that's good for the people upstream. The water level will be higher. If they go and help and clean downstream, then the water will flow faster and will be lower where they are at. So they don't have to help in something that is not going to benefit them. Now, the opposite is true for rainwater, in other words, sewage water, that is going through the city and would be flooding up the streets, and you want to get that water out of here quickly. And so in that case, it's the opposite. In that case, the upper ones have to help the lower ones, because if it's stopped up down below, then it's going to be stopped up for the ones up above also. So the upper ones have to go downstream and help them clear it out. But the lower ones don't have to help the people upstream, because if it's stuck upstream, that's actually good for the people downstream. It won't get to them. If they're going to go help upstream, it's going to flow more towards them. And so that makes sense for the opposite, because in the first case, they want the ones upstream want to keep the water for themselves, and so they don't have to help downstream. Whereas everybody wants the water in the first case, whereas the second case they want the water to go away, and so therefore it's the opposite. Tanyana mehachi, we have a baraita that supports Rav Yehuda's rule. Chamesh ganot mistapekot mayim ma'ayan echad v'nitkalkel ha'ma'ayan kulam metakenot im ha'elyona. Nimseet ha'tachtona metakenet im kulan metakenet le'asma. Baraita talks about 5 gardens that all draw water from one spring, and each one is further down from the other. You have one that's right next to the spring, and then it flows down to the ones further downstream. So this is a case where they want the water. Now, if something happens to the spring, everybody has to come up and fix it, because they all need the water. So the ones down all have to go up. Now, if a problem happens in the middle, then the upper ones don't have to help, but the lower ones do. So what you have in the end is that the guy that's lowest down, he has to help everybody above him. But if it breaks right before if the flow breaks right before him, then he only helps himself. The people on top don't have to help him because it doesn't benefit them for the water to keep flowing down to him. In fact, it's a detriment. And now the opposite case. If you have 5 courtyards and they have water runoff, their sewer is going into one sewage canal, and it got messed up. So then everybody has to come down to the end of it, to the lowest part, because if it's stuck there, then nothing's going to flow. So they all, benefits everybody to help the lowest guy. And each guy has to help the guy below him. But the top one, the top guy has to help everybody below him, but nobody has to help him out, because if the sewage line breaks and on his property, that doesn't, no one else cares. Actually, we'd rather not get his sewage come down to their, through their area. Amar Shemuel, Hayman de achazik berakta de nahara, chasifa have, saluke la mesalekinan le. Shemuel teaches that if there's some empty land on the bank of a river that nobody owns, and it's used by the public, they pull their boats there, and they load and unload, and they do their thing. And then someone comes along, and he makes a chazakah. He claims it, he squats there. So this is not a very nice thing to do, and we call it chutzpah. What are you doing? You're taking this land that everybody's using, and now you're taking it for yourself. However, legally, we cannot remove him, because this was ownerless land, and he now took it, and he stayed there and used it, and now it's his. He took possession, he has a chazakah. So that's the original law. However, however, nowadays, where the Persian, the Sasanian Persian Empire, that's where Shemuel and all the Babylonian rabbis lived under the Persians, they have a rule that if you own land next to a waterfront, then you also own all the way up to the water and even into the water, all the way until where a horse's neck would go. That's how deep you have that homer owns into the water. And therefore, since the Persians consider the waterfront and the water itself all to be owned by whoever owns that land and on the beach front, therefore, if someone comes and claims it and squats there, we can remove him, because it's not no man's land. It actually does belong to the person that owns the land on the shore. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav Hayman techazik b'nei ache u'b'nei shutafeh hasifa have saluke la mesalekinan le. Rav Yehuda says, name of Rav, a similar law from as Shemuel said, about someone who does something that's chutzpah. So let's say there's some land that's between two brothers. The two brother owns some land here, another brother here, and there's some empty land, ownerless land in the middle. Or two partners that own land, and there's some empty, ownerless land in the middle. And some guy comes and jumps in and squats on that land and then claims it. Well, no one else claimed it, so he technically has a right. However, it's not a very nice thing to do. It's quite impudent. He should obviously the brothers or the partners are going to want to settle there. They just didn't get a chance yet for whatever reason. They were busy. And this guy comes and runs and does it before them. But since he did get there first, so we cannot remove him. Rav Nachman Amar, Na'ame mesalekinan, v'mishum dina debar misra, la mesalekinan lehem. Rav Nachman says, this is such chutzpah, totally not nice. You can remove them. However, Rav Nachman, we cannot remove them because of the law of bar misra. Let's introduce this law, which is going to take us down to the end of the daf. The law of bar misra means that if I own some land and I decide to sell it, I have to offer it to my next door neighbor first before I offer it to anybody else. And that's because it's more valuable to my next door neighbor than to anyone else. We're talking specifically about fields, not so much for houses. Because if you own two fields next to each other, then it's very easy to plow them. You just have the ox and it goes right across this way and right across that way. And so it's worth a lot to the next door neighbor. Whereas for someone that doesn't have a field nearby, so that's not going to be as valuable to him. If you own two pieces of land that are far from each other, let's say the neighbor, if he wants more land, he has to go buy something farther away, then it's a pain. He has to take his ox and go over there and come back. And so it's really, twice as much work to plow and take care of two lands that are separate from each other. But if they're all next to each other, then that is much easier for him. And therefore, this is a proper thing to do, to give the neighbor the first right of refusal. Not only is the responsibility of the seller to offer it, even if the seller does not, let's say I own that land, and I don't tell my neighbor about it. I go and sell it to a third party. The neighbor has a right to say, go to that third party and say, hey, the owner didn't offer it to me, and therefore, thank you, you bought it on my behalf. Of course, he has to pay whatever that sale price was, and then that third party ends up just being like a shaliach, an intermediary to buy it on his behalf, and the bar mitzvah literally means the one who is on the border, the neighbor, can take it. Okay, so Rav Nachman says the law of bar mitzvah does not apply here. Either because, as she says, Rav Nachman doesn't hold of the law of bar mitzvah at all, but that's unlikely because it's a very widespread law. So more likely, he holds of the law and generally, but as Tosafot says, this case is different because it's not a sale. This land was ownerless and some guy came and squatted there. So the law of bar mitzvah does not apply to it. However, Rav Nachman says, because he is so chutzpahdik to go take this land and squat on it between two partners, so actually we do kick him off. The rabbis of Nehar De'ah agree that we kick him off. Rav Nachman also says in this case of the brothers and partners, we kick him off. And Nehar De'ah says the law of bar mitzvah does apply in this case. And they bring a pasuk that backs up the law of bar mitzvah, because the Torah says, do what's right and good in the eyes of Hashem. Is this right and good to, your neighbor has an opportunity and you're just going to go and take it from him? Is this right and good to go squat on the land and you see there are two brothers on either side and obviously they're going to want to take that land in between so that they can join their properties and have one big one, and that makes their business better, and you go and you take that one. I mean, you can go and take if you're buying land, you can go buy a different land. You have to buy this one that's is more valuable to the people next door, and therefore from the Harda they say that the law of mitzvah applies in this case as well. Atayim lichbe amale ezil izbun v'amale zil zebon sarich lemikna mineh ola. Now we have a case of bar mitzvah. If someone wants to come and buy, let's say, my land, and he goes to my neighbor and he says, listen, I want to buy this land. Can I do that? And the neighbor says, yes, go ahead and buy it. Now, do they have to make a kinyan? Is the verbal agreement sufficient? Or do they have to do some kind of physical transaction to solidify the commitment that the neighbor says, I don't want it, you can buy it, and so that the neighbor doesn't have to can't get it anymore. And then if you don't do a formal acquisition, then maybe the neighbor can change his mind. So that's the question. Is a verbal agreement enough, or do you need a formal transaction? Ravina amar la sarich lemikna mineh. Nehardea amre sarich lemikna mineh. V'hilcheta sarich lemikna mineh. Ravina says you don't have to do a formal transaction. You asked the neighbor. He said, you take it, that's it, then you're allowed to buy it. But the rabbis of Nehardea say you have to make a transaction, and the halacha is in fact that you have to make a transaction. Now that we know the halacha is that you do have to make a formal acquisition with the neighbor to say, listen, I'm buying it, you're out. That means that if the buyer does not make a formal acquisition, then the neighbor can change his mind after, and he can come and say, oh, listen, I want it. But if he does so, and in the meantime, it either gets more expensive or less expensive, that gain or loss will be suffered or enjoyed by the neighbor, by the bar mitzvah, bar mitzvah. We give examples both ways. Zeban b'me'ah v'shaveh matan. Someone bought a field for 100, but actually it's worth 200. He got a good deal. Chazena ile kula amaka mozil na mezaben yahib le me'ah v'shakil le. So we see, if the owner of the field originally would give that discount price to anyone, right, he's just a nice guy and he sells things for cheap, then the neighbor only has to pay 100, because even though it's worth 200 on the general market, the neighbor could have gotten it for 100 because the owner would have sold it to anyone. So therefore the neighbor gives 100 to that third-party buyer and gets it. However, if the owner would not have sold it to anybody else for 100, the owner had a special relationship, was very friendly with this buyer, and gave him a discount of 100. But really, the sale price to anyone else would have been 200. In that case, the neighbor has to pay 200 to the third-party buyer, and only then he can take it, because that, in fact, is really the price. Zeban b'matan v'shavya me'ah. Sevur mina maseh amar le letakune shedartich vela le'avuteh. If the owner sold it for 200, but really it was only worth 100, that third-party buyer, he overpaid double the amount. So at first we thought to say that the neighbor who's coming to now collect it can say to that third-party buyer, you are basically my agent, right? Because I always have a right to buy it. You didn't make a formal transaction, so you're acting as my real estate agent. And so I sent you for my benefit, but not for my detriment. In general, whenever you send a messenger and the messenger messes up, you can say, well, you're not my messenger because I sent you to do something good. You did something bad, well, then that's not part of your messengership, and therefore you never were a messenger. So that's what we thought to say at first, that first sale would be null and void, and the original and the neighbor can go back to the original owner and say, listen, it was only worth 100. Here, I'll give you 100. I'm taking it, and that you deal with the other guy. However, Amar le mor kashisha bered Rav Chisda Rav Ashe hachi amre nehardea mishum de Rav Nachman en ona'a lekarkaot. But then Mor Kashisha, the son of Rav Chisda, told Rav Ashe that the rabbis from the Harda said in the name of Rav Nachman that there's no overcharging when it comes to land. The law of ona'ah, which we learned about, is if you pay more than the 6 over the market price, that's for movable items, staple items that have a fixed price. But for land, sometimes this particular land is worth a lot for you. You can't just, they're not growing anymore. And so for land, if someone is willing to pay a higher price, then that's a valid sale. And therefore, you cannot do that, and the neighbor has to pay whatever it is. You pay 200, the third party paid 200 for it, he has to pay 200 in order to get the land. Zaben le geriva de'ar'a b'mis'ah nichseh. Hazinan i'iditi iziburiti zebine. Ve'ila i'arume ka'ma'arim. An interesting case. Someone owns a piece of land. It's a square. And imagine there's a small square inside the big square. The owner of the land sells the middle small square of land to a third party. So now, is this a valid sale? Can the neighbor of the outside land, come and complain and take it? So we see, it depends. If that small square of land is of different quality than the surrounding land. For example, the land is superior quality and the rest is not, or that is inferior quality and land is not, then it's a valid sale because it makes sense that the owner wants to say, listen, this little piece in the middle, it's not as good as the rest around it. I just want to sell it, and here, someone else take care of it. Then we consider it a valid sale. But if not, if that middle piece is the same quality as the rest of the land, why would he be selling the middle section of his land? Isn't that inconvenient? He has to let someone keep coming in and out. Oh, it must be he's trying to use a loophole. This is what he wants to do. He wants to sell all of his land to someone else, and he doesn't want a problem of bar mitzvah. He doesn't want the neighbor to have a right to it. And this is what he does. First, the owner sells a small piece of land in the middle. There are no neighbors. He sells it to that third party. After that sale, he'll come back in a few days, then he sells the rest of the land also to him. And at that point, the neighbor cannot complain because this guy is also a neighbor. He owns the land bordering it, actually on all sides of his land. And so since he's a neighbor and he's a neighbor, so they have equal rights to it. But that is not valid. Here it's clear that he's just using a trick to sell the middle land so that he could be the third party called a neighbor and therefore keep it. But that's not a valid sale. And the actual neighbor, for the long-time neighbor, can come and say, that's a trick, and I have first right to buy the entire thing. Matana let ba mishum dina de bar misra. Giving, if I want to give a gift to someone, then the neighbor cannot complain and take it. Or says, oh, you gave it to him as a gift. I'm the neighbor. Give it to me as a gift. No, I'm not willing to give it to you as a gift, neighbor. Right? I want to give this gift to my friend over here. Amar says, however, if I write to the gift giver that I am guaranteeing that even if this land that I'm giving him has a lien on it and someone comes and collects it, a creditor of mine, then I will make up for it and I'll pay him back. And I'll pay him, not back, I'll pay him for the amount of that land, so it's a guaranteed gift. In that case, it looks more like a sale, because that makes it very formal, and it's kind of like a real sale. It just happens to be the purchase price is zero. So because it looks more like a sale, then the law of bar mitzvah would apply, and the neighbor can come and say, no, I have first rights, and I get it. Machar kol nechasav le'achad let ba mishum dina de bar misra. If I own lots of land in different places, and I sell my entire estate to one person, in that case, I don't have to deal with the neighbors because I'm selling my entire estate intact. I don't have to go now and say, oh, this land has a neighbor here and that land has a neighbor there. If I'm just selling one piece, I have to take care of the neighbor. But if I want to sell the entire estate has value as an estate because it's all whole as it is. And therefore, if I'm selling the entire thing, then there's no law bar mitzvah. If I'm selling the land to the owner that I originally bought it from, there's no law bar mitzvah because I am basically returning a lost object. The original owner, he had to sell it, whatever, he needed some cash, and so I bought it, and now I'm returning it to him. So the original owner has a right to it over the neighbor. So the neighbor doesn't have absolute right because there's also a asita yashar v'hatov. For the original owner to get it back is also a yashar v'hatov. If someone buys land from a non-Jew or sells to a non-Jew, in either of those cases, there's no law of bar mitzvah. The neighbor cannot complain. We'll explain each way. If I buy it from a non-Jew, and that neighbor says, oh, what, you bought the land next door to me from a non-Jew? I wanted to buy it. You have to give it to me. I can tell that neighbor, no, I did you a favor. I chased away a lion. Generally, non-Jews were not always good neighbors. They'd cause problems to the Jews that they were next to. And says, listen, you had a bad neighbor. I sent away the neighbor. Now you have a nice Jewish neighbor. So you should be thankful. If a Jew sold land to a non-Jew, so the non-Jew certainly is not obligated in the law of bar misra. If the Jewish neighbor goes to the non-Jew and say, hey, I have first right to buy it. The non-Jew says, I don't know what you're talking about. I bought it. Go away. However, the seller did do something wrong because the seller should have offered it to his neighbor first. But he sold it already. So now what could we do? Well, we can excommunicate that seller until he accepts upon himself any problems that can come because of that non-Jewish neighbor. If he turns out to be a nice non-Jewish neighbor, okay, fine. But if he gives problems to the Jewish neighbor, then the seller, what are you doing? You should have offered it to the neighbor first. You didn't? Now you have to accept responsibility for anything bad that happens. Mashkanta let ba mishum dina de bar misra. Damar Rav Asher, amru li sabeh demata machsaya. My mashkanta dishchuna gabe. My nafkamina ledina de bar misra. Mortgage property is not subject to the law of bar misra. So, if I borrowed money from you and I gave you land and I said, here's a guarantee on this land as a mortgage, and then I don't pay and I say, here, just keep the land. So now this lender owns this land. The neighbor can't come and say, oh, I'm the neighbor. I get the land. No, it wasn't a sale. It was just the default on a loan, and so the lender keeps that land. So what's the reason for this? Because Rav Asher says that the elders of Mesia told him, Why is it called mashkanta? Tishchuna gabe, that he lives there. The lender is considered to be the one who lives there. Once the other guy doesn't pay because he has a lien on this property, so now he's considered the resident. Now, why does it matter if you call him the resident? It matters for the law of Bar Misra. It's not like a sale where the buyer comes in and says, and the neighbor can come and say, "You're a buyer. I should have bought it first." No, we consider the lender as if he is the one who lives there, so he doesn't have to deal with the neighbor. Limkor berachok v'ligol bekarov. If I have some land and I want to sell it because it's far away from where I live, and I want to flip it and sell it and take that money quickly and go buy other land that I found that's available that's closer to my house, or I have land that's not so good. And now I have an opportunity. I have a buyer who's willing to buy my land, and for the same price, I can go and buy land that's better, or maybe for a little bit more that I'm going to add to it from my own savings, and I'm going to buy good land. I don't have to worry about the neighbor of the land that I'm selling. Why? Because I need to get the money right away. The other deal's on the line, and if I delay and say, "Oh, wait, hold on, the neighbor wants it," the neighbor says, "Oh, let me think about it. Yeah, I want it. Let me get some money together." So by the time I do all that, I'll lose out on the opportunity of the land that I want to buy, the better one, or the one that's closer to my house, and therefore that would be imposing too much on the seller to ask him to lose his deal because of the neighbor. If someone needs to sell a field because he has to pay taxes, or he has to pay for the sustenance of his wife or his daughters, or someone in his family dies, he has to pay for the burial. So he can't wait until the neighbor comes and says, "Oh, yeah, I'll come up with the money, come back in 3 days." He has a burial he has to deal with. So he has to sell it immediately. He found a buyer, so he doesn't have to go ask the neighbors. And the proof for this is that if property of orphans needs to raise money for any of these things, for paying taxes, for sustenance, or for burial, then the Beit Din can sell off the orphan's property for these things without a proclamation. Usually, when a Beit Din sells property of orphans, they have to make a 30-day announcement so that it's offered for sale in the public auction to make sure they get the best price. That's good. That protects the orphans. But if they need cash right away, then we don't do that. And so if we override the interest of the orphans because for this need, then all the more so we're going to override the interest of a neighbor because they need the cash right away. If someone is selling land to a woman, to orphans, or to partners, also there's no law of bar misra. The reason is because women don't get opportunities so often to buy. They're not out in the marketplace looking for real estate deals. And so if something happens, a woman happens to come upon a deal and she wants to buy land, then she gets the land and the neighbor can't complain. Same thing with orphans. They have a good deal comes their way, the neighbor can't come and take it from them because they're not in regular business to be able to find deals right away. The basic law of bar misra is that we tell the buyer, "Why are you buying this land? You need land? Okay, you could buy any land. Just give the first right of buying it to the neighbor, and then you go buy something else." So that makes sense. It only applies to a buyer who can find something. If not here, he'll find something there. But these people are not finding deals often. And similarly to partners, certainly if they're partners on the land and then one sells it, he can sell it to the other partner. He doesn't have to worry about the neighbor because the person who he's partners with is a neighbor. And this seems that this would be true even if they're neighbors on a different deal. One of the partners can, and this partner owns land, he can sell it to his business partner in something else because since they're business partners, they're already like a shared entity, and so he can sell it to his other partner. if someone's selling a field and there are multiple neighbors, and so one of the neighbors, their field is closer to the city, and the other neighbor, their field is farther away from the city on the direction of the fields. So the law is that the neighbor who is in the direction closer to the city takes precedence. Shachen v'tamid chacham kodem. Someone's selling a field and he can either sell it to the neighbor or to a Torah scholar. The Torah scholar comes first. That way, it gives an opportunity for the Torah scholar to be able to make a living and more easily, and thereby learn and teach Torah better. Karov tamid chacham kodem. Someone can sell a field to a relative or to a Torah scholar. Again, Torah scholar wins out. What if it's between a neighbor and a relative? Who should you sell it to? And we quote the pasuk in Mishlei that says, a good neighbor is better than a brother who's far. Sometimes you have a brother, oh, he's my brother. Yeah, but then you're not so close to your brother. You don't have such a good relationship. A good neighbor, you might have a better relationship than just with a brother. And so therefore, it seems that the neighbor should win out. If the neighbor is offering good coins, but you have another seller who's offering pre-weighed dinarim, the best coins, or pre-weighed, there's no problem, then the law bar mitzvah does not apply. The seller can say, I want to get the best coins. I don't have to take the only good coins. If the neighbor is offering me coins that are all wrapped up, and someone else comes and offers me coins that are loose and easier to count, they're right there, the other ones are all bound up, it's going to be hard to count. So again, there's no law about a mitzvah. I can take the money that's not wrapped because that's preferable to me. If I'm selling my land and I have a buyer there ready to buy it, and so I go to my neighbor, listen, you want to buy it? You're the neighbor, you have the first right. And the neighbor says, let me go and do some work and get some money. Yeah, I want to buy it, but I have to go and I have to figure out where to get the money. I don't have to wait for you to go and go to the bank, get a mortgage maybe, and borrow money and somehow get money from far away. No, I want to make the deal, do the sale right away. If he leaves out the word work, if he just says, wait, I'm going to go get the money, then we look. If he's a person who is of good financial standing, and we know that if we just wait a little, he just has to go down the block to where he hides his money, and he will bring it, then I have to wait for him. For sure he's going to have the money, then I have to wait and sell it to him. But if he's not a person who is of financially upstanding, who has the money available, if I don't think he has the money available, then I don't have to wait for him, because I don't have to wait or potentially lose out on the sale or delay my sale, and certainly I don't have to take less for the sale, or worse currency, or in a worse form. So I only have to give it to the neighbor if everything else being equal, then the neighbor gets it. But otherwise, I can sell it to a buyer that I find. If you have a situation where you have land owned by one person, and there's a house on the land, but the house is owned by someone else. And now the person that sells the house wants to sell the house to someone else, to a third party. The person that owns the land could say, no, I am the neighbor. I actually literally own the land all around your house, even under your house, and therefore I have the first right to buy the house. But the other way around, if the person that owns the land wants to sell the land to a third party, the person that owns the house cannot prevent them from doing so and say, I have a house here, I'm the neighbor, you have to sell it to me. No, a house is not as substantial as the land itself. The land is the main thing, and therefore the person that owns the land can demand to say, you have to sell me the house, but not the other way around. Similarly, if land is owned by one person, but the trees that are on the land are owned by someone else, in that case, if the owner of the trees wants to sell his trees to a third party, the owner of the land can say, no, I am the neighbor, right? They're on my land, and so you have to sell to me first. But the other way around, if the owner of the land wants to sell his land to someone else, the owner of the trees can't say, oh, I'm here, right? He's actually not a neighbor. He doesn't own the land. He only owns trees. And so therefore, he cannot prevent the owner of the land from selling that land to a different person. Someone's selling land, and one buyer wants to live in it, and someone else, the neighbor, wants to use it for planting. So in that case, the one who wants to build a house and live in it is better, because settling the land is more important than planting in the land. Planting also is important. You need food, but living space is more important, and therefore we can ignore the claim of the neighbor and sell it to the person who wants to build a home there. Afsik meshunita or richba de dikla hazena im yachol lachnis ba afilu telem echad it ba mishum dina debar misra ve'ila let ba mishum dina debar misra. If you have 2 fields, I own one of them, I'm going to sell it. But between the fields, there's rocks or a row of palm trees, and so there's a barrier between the 2 fields. So do I still consider the neighbor a bar mitzvah, and I have to offer it to him first? Well, it depends. We see. If there's enough space between the rocks or between the trees that you can even have one continuous furrow, then that's called the law bar mitzvah. The point of bar mitzvah is that it's easier to plow 2 fields next to each other because the ox will keep going right on. And so if there is space to have one furrow right through, then that's good. And then you have to give it to the neighbor. But if not, if the border is totally sealed and you couldn't even make one furrow, then there's no law about a misra. It's not because it just happens to be next door, but it's because it has to be continuous area without a border that's blocking anything going through. Hane arba'a bene misrane dekadim chad minai uzben zibine zibine v'ikol hu atu behadeh hadadeh palgu la bekar nazil. Let's say someone is selling land. He has 4 neighbors, right? From all different sides. Everybody is, each of the sides are owned by different people. So if one of these neighbors comes and claims and buys the land, then it all goes to him, right? Whoever is first, let's say neighbor A, he buys this land first. So then neighbor B, C, and D, they have no claim because they came too late. But if they all come at the same time, right? They heard that I own this land. They heard I'm selling the land. They all show up and say, right, I'm the neighbor. I want to buy it. I'm bar mitzvah. I want to buy it. In that case, we have to split it. And we split it down the middle. Literally, we make a diagonal lines, an X in the middle. And that way, neighbor A, he has his entire border that's shared with me. He gets all of that land, right, in a triangle. And so on with each of them according to this diagram. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.